The books of the New Testament Bible. Specifically in this video, I want to focus on just the four. And those four are Mark, Matthew, Luke, and John. Now, these three of those four books are considered to be the synoptic gospels, right? And then we have the book of John. And I guess the point that I want to make in this video is when we look at those books and you raise the question, they say they have very fanciful tales, right? And many Christian apologists want you to believe that these books are a collection of, stories that were passed down through the first century, that were written down to preserve a historical event, right? That's what it's reported to be as. And I think one of the first problems that we have is, at least I can say with certainty, that the first, I think it's just the three, or maybe even all four of them, are unknown in their authorship. There may be some speculation out there, but I think that's the genuinely historian, scholarly type position that's held, is the authors of the Gospels of the Bible are unknown. Why would that be? If they are reporting history and the people that write it are credible sources, why not give the names of, say, well, maybe this was just a thing that they did. It was tradition to just give names of books but not credit the authors. Well, I mean, that may have been, I don't know that to be the case, but one would think, though, that, they would say, I so-and-so. I'm just saying, if they were reporting or masquerading, which is what I think they are doing, is masquerading as historians, if they were actually true people that were, there and were eyewitnesses, why wouldn't they just give us other names and say, I so-and-so, I John of whatever, and I Matt, those aren't, Mark. Who are those people? I mean, these are just the names, the titles of the books. And that's the scholarly held opinion, is these are just, the titles of the books are not the authors. And so why would that be? Why would authorship not be known? And that's a great question, I think. And also, when you're thinking about, okay, if the gospel writers were writing in history, why did they not write at the time that the events occurred? Well, there could be a number of reasons, but they don't really address that. And don't you think that, it kind of helps with your credibility if you can go in and say, well, the reason I didn't write this down for the last 4 decades, and say, like the case of, Jesus was like 30-something AD, so around 70, around 80 is where they say Matthew was written, right? So 4 decades after the alleged time of Jesus, we've got Matthew writing his first gospel, right? Even though that's not the author's name, that's all we have to go on. Why would he wait until, such a long period of time to write his gospel, and, long after? It just doesn't help with the credibility thing. I mean, it doesn't, again, throw everything out and say, oh, it's hogwash, this is just an embellishment, this is just a made-up story. I mean, but it kind of hurts the credibility a little bit when you don't have somebody who was actually writing at that time when the events were supposed to occur. You have someone writing long after. I mean, several decades after. I mean, by the time you get to John, some of the people that you talk to, scholarly types, that try to figure out the dating of the Gospel of John, you're looking at well into 100 something, AD. So it's like, why would that be? Why would that be the case? Now, other than just being a good question, I mean, I would hope to be able to figure that answer out. Now, you talk to some Christian apologists, and they'll have their explanations for why that Paul wrote long before the gospel writers, when Paul doesn't write anything near to the detail that we get. I mean, this is the life of Jesus in the 4 Gospels, but yet they weren't even written first. So I think that's a little suspect. I've said that in my other videos, but just going back to thinking, like, okay, if you're going to be a good historian, if you're going to do a good account of history, one, we ought to know who you are. It ought to be well known and documented that this person was a historian at the time. Instead, what we're left going is, well, maybe it was just somebody that made this up. Maybe this was just a story that was circulating at the time, and it's just completely anonymous. So when you have an anonymous story, no one's taking ownership for it, except for the Catholic, would have been the Catholic Church at the time when they canonized everything and put all these Gospels together. And of course, we had all those other Gospels that were out there that were not included in the Protestant Bible, that were included in the the Catholic canonization of the New Testament, and then even some of those books, with I think it was Bishop Irenaeus or Ignatius, I can't remember which one, left some of those out because they were even more fanciful than the books that were in there. So it just makes you wonder, if you can't have a credible source to go back to, why should we be compelled to believe that this is actually a credible story? I mean, if the author is going to be anonymous, there's no way to know who wrote this. I mean, obviously Josephus was a historian that we say, okay, Josephus wrote these things, and he puts his name on it, but not with the Gospels. And such an elaborate story, such a amazing story as the life of Jesus. One would think that whoever wrote them would put their name on it. I mean, we know they're not eyewitnesses. They don't claim to be eyewitnesses. So again, that really causes a lot of doubt in the validity or the us being able to ascertain whether this was actually a true story or not. I mean, they're not saying I was there and this is third person, second hand, whatever. We're not getting it first person. So that's a little concerning too as well. And so you put all that together and you say, well, why is this so concerning? Well, because you would think that if the creator of the universe was orchestrating and controlling all this, and was giving divine inspiration to these writers, I mean, that they would have at least been able to say, yeah, I saw it, and they could have named themselves, saying, because that's what Paul does. Paul says he gets what he writes through divine revelation. So the gospel writers would have been no less to be able to make that claim or make that assertion as well, right? So they certainly could have said that, but they don't. And so it makes you wonder why. Why? I mean, where did these people get their information? Oh, well, through divine revelation. Well, it's rather convenient. That's too easy for someone to say, like it was with Paul, to say, hey, I'm going to change everything that the Jews have been following for all these thousands of years, and now because I'm Paul and I say I had some conversion on the road to Damascus, I met Jesus, and Jesus gave me the gospel that I preach, but then yet later on, Paul turns around and says, and this is kind of the controversy about what Paul says, where he says, this is the gospel I preach, I got it from no man, but then he goes back to, I think it's Peter, James, and John, in Jerusalem, and he's like, hey, is this okay with you guys? So I'm like, well, why, Paul, why would you need to say that if you got this right from the head honcho himself, if you got it from God himself, if Jesus bestowed this knowledge that you preach, the gospel you preach, you don't need to check. I mean, I guess unless, like Gary Habermas said one time, who's a Christian apologist, he said that, basically, well, what's wrong with that? When he was in debate with Dr. Robert M. Price, he said, why would that be a problem, Bob? He's like, that maybe Paul was just going back to check in with the Home Office and, say, hey, does this match up with what? But it's kind of goofy because he's Paul. If he gets his message directly from God, he doesn't need to check with no man. In fact, he says he didn't get it from any man. So, okay, fine. Maybe Paul didn't, but it's relatively convenient in my mind that you can make these claims and say, I got this through divine revelation, because no one can really cross-check. So Christians, when they were challenged and asked about the authenticity of the New Testament Gospels, they said, oh, well, it was divinely inspired, but we don't know who wrote them. They're anonymous. It's like, why couldn't we have known? Well, maybe it was God's plan not for us to know. I mean, there's all these kind of, after the fact, ad hoc theories that come about because you have to try to reconcile the fact that we don't know. And I'm just saying that I think if it was actually a true historical event, Jesus' life and what's accounted for in the New Testament Gospels, that we would have had the authors' names. We would have known who these people were. I mean, Paul made himself known and said, and I don't think anyone disputes whether or not Paul really existed. I mean, obviously, he was, we believe he was a real historical figure, and I believe that's been corroborated. So there would have been no problem with them, the gospel writers, listing themselves. But I guess this was a thing that they did in antiquity. I guess they did not provide their names sometimes, but it seems a little suspect because the writers, the authors that we don't know that are anonymous, didn't write at the time when the events were happening. It's hearsay. This is what they say. But again, it's supposed to originate from the heavens above. It's supposed to have come from God, and God was supposed to give them divine revelation. And but that's all convenient when the authors are anonymous, and it's like, well, you can't go back and say, well, who were the writers, and it's just too convenient. In my humble opinion, anyways, it's too convenient. Just like I was saying with Paul, it makes no sense why he's like, oh, well, I got this information directly from, okay, yeah, well, no one can say he didn't. But the same argument is made by Muhammad and says, He got the information, the Prophet Muhammad got his information in a cave when it was revealed to him by a bunch of heavenly beings, some angels. So what's the difference? Obviously, it's the same thing. So we have, then in my mind at least, we have reason to doubt the validity of the claims that are being made. We have reason to doubt whether or not this historical masquerading of his history of the life of Jesus is really truthful or not. I do think there is grounds to question it, and that's why many good secular scholars do question it, and they don't just take it, hook, line, and sinker. They go in and they look at it and say, you know what? These people were anonymous. We don't know who they were. What's their credibility? And, just don't worry about it. Just take it and believe that it's true, and trust that it's true. And it's like, no, that's not being a good historian. That's not how, and I'm not a historian. I'm just saying, from listening to people like Dr. Richard Carrier, who is a well-educated and respected historian. He's one of many, of course, not the only one out there, but takes a position that we have reason to doubt. Check out his book on the historicity of Jesus. Listen to the arguments that he makes in there, and then say, oh yeah, but I'll still keep believing what the apologist says because I like that better. I mean, you can do that, but it seems to me that there's a cogent argument that Dr. Carrier makes in his book and some of his others, as well as many other skeptics and critical scholars of the Bible. So, I think that we have reason, I'll close with this, I think we have good reason to think that what we have in the Gospels is not, because it wasn't written at the time of Jesus, and, one would think that if they're not eyewitnesses, they're anonymous writers. For all of those reasons, I think that we have good reason to not believe that the stories are true. If you want to take it on faith and you want to believe it and say that this was divinely inspired, divine revelation from God, I mean, so be it. That's certainly your prerogative to do so. But I don't think, as a free thinker and as someone who's pretty rational and analytical, that doesn't jive with me. And maybe it doesn't jive with you and you're like a skeptic like me. But if you're a Christian, I would just urge you, and you're watching this video, I would urge you to think on those things and question everything. Question the beliefs that you have and why you believe what you believe, and question what's been reported as fact, as historical, when it very well may not be a historical record. Thanks for watching this video. We'll see you next time. Take care.